The air was thick with tension as the human crew aboard the research vessel Astrius hovered above the desolate planet. The ship's engines hummed low, casting a soft, steady vibration beneath their feet. Captain Sarah Jenkins stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the holoscreen in front of her, analyzing the coordinates they had received from the mysterious transmission. "All systems are stable," came the voice of her chief engineer, David, breaking her focus for a moment. "But, Captain, I still don't understand why we're here. This place is abandoned. No signs of life. The readings are strange." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Her hand hovered over the controls, adjusting the ship's trajectory toward the coordinates that had been sent to them, coordinates that came from a source nobody could identify. The data was inconsistent, fragmented, almost as if someone, or something, was deliberately hiding it. Yet, there was no denying the urgency behind it. The transmission had been too clear, too deliberate. "We're here because of what they found," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "The artifact. We've been searching for something like this for years. Now it's time to see if we can actually find it." Her crew, a mix of scientists, engineers, and explorers, murmured in agreement. Most of them had been skeptical when they first received the mission, but now, as the ancient ruins of a long-forgotten alien civilization loomed closer on the surface below, they could sense the gravity of the situation. Something important was buried down there. Something that could change everything. The Astrius descended through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as they broke the dense clouds that shielded the planet's surface. The planet itself was eerily quiet, no signs of life, not even the usual hum of alien wildlife that they had grown accustomed to hearing on other planets. Just barren, lifeless land stretching as far as the eye could see. When they landed, the crew suited up in their exploration gear, each of them feeling a rush of adrenaline mixed with curiosity. They knew the risks. After all, they were entering a space that had been sealed off for centuries, a place that no one, not even the most advanced civilizations, had ever dared to explore. "Ready, Captain," David said, looking over at her as he locked his helmet into place. Sarah gave a nod. "Let's make history." The airlock opened with a loud hiss, and the crew stepped out onto the alien soil. The surface was cracked and uneven, the color of dried blood, with jagged rock formations scattered like broken bones. As they moved forward, the team couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking on something more than just a barren wasteland. They were walking on a forgotten history, a past that had been erased for a reason. Their boots crunched on the dusty surface as they made their way toward the coordinates. Their scanners buzzing quietly. In the distance, half buried in the dirt, was what appeared to be the outline of a large structure, its edges obscured by the centuries of decay. "This is it," Sarah murmured, her voice filled with awe as she looked at the structure ahead. The ruins of a long-lost civilization. They approached carefully, scanning every inch of the area. The structure seemed to be made of materials not native to any known species. Smooth, metallic surfaces that shimmered despite the decades of neglect. As they stepped closer, Sarah's heart raced. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very air around them was alive with anticipation. "Captain, you need to see this," one of her scientists, Dr. Ethan Moore, called out from the other side of the structure. Sarah hurried over to him, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust as she went. Ethan stood by a peculiar object half buried in the earth. It looked like a stone tablet, but as she knelt beside it, Sarah realized it was far from ordinary. "This doesn't look like any artifact we've encountered before," Ethan said, brushing the dirt away with a gloved hand. "It's almost alive." Sarah studied it closely. The stone was etched with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. There was an energy coming from it, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. "It's a warning," Sarah said, almost to herself as she read the symbols. The language was alien, but she felt an inexplicable understanding of it, like her mind was trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle she didn't even know she was solving. "What kind of warning?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes. Before Sarah could respond, a loud, distorted noise suddenly erupted from the device in her hand. It was as though the artifact itself was trying to communicate. The sound was alien, unintelligible, but it was enough to make the crew freeze in place. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down their spines, a voice they hadn't heard before, the words were clear, but not in any language they had ever known. "You have no idea what you've just uncovered." The voice echoed through their comms, distorting the air around them. It wasn't human. It wasn't even something they could recognize as alien. It was deep, guttural, and unmistakably ancient. "Captain." David's voice crackled through the comms, sharp with panic. "We need to get out of here. Something's happening." The air around them began to hum. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, as though the planet itself was waking up. Suddenly, the structure they had been investigating seemed to come alive. Panels that had been dormant for centuries lit up, flickering to life in a display of radiant energy. The hum grew louder, and the crew felt an unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. "Everyone, move. Get back to the ship," Sarah shouted, already turning to head toward the Astrius. But before she could take more than a few steps, the ground beneath them cracked open with a deafening sound, sending them stumbling backward. A flash of bright light exploded from the structure, blinding them for a moment. When the light faded, the landscape had changed. The once lifeless planet now felt alive, as though it had been awakened from a long slumber. The team looked around in confusion. The once barren horizon was now dotted with strange shapes in the distance, movements they hadn't noticed before. Something, or someone, was out there, watching them. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" David's voice was shaking with fear now. Before Sarah could answer, another burst of energy erupted from the artifact. The hum intensified, and the ship's communication systems began to glitch, as though some unseen force was trying to scramble them. "Captain, the ship's systems are failing," David reported urgently. "We're stuck here. We can't leave." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The message they had received wasn't just a warning, it was a signal. And now, it was clear that they weren't alone on this planet. The artifact had called them here, and whatever force lay beyond it was preparing to make its move. The last thing Sarah heard before everything went black was the chilling voice once again, sending a final warning. "You should not have come." When Sarah woke, her head throbbed with pain. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. Her arms felt heavy, and the ground beneath her was cold and hard. Slowly, she blinked her eyes open, her vision blurry at first. The world around her swirled into focus, and she realized she was lying in the dust-covered remains of the alien structure. The hum was gone. For a moment, she thought she had imagined everything, the voice, the lights, the energy surge. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw the evidence of what had happened. The walls of the structure were now completely illuminated, glowing with strange symbols and intricate designs that hadn't been there before. The entire space pulsed with an eerie energy, and the air felt thick, charged. "Captain, you're awake." It was David, kneeling beside her, his face etched with worry. His helmet was off, and sweat was dripping down his forehead. "We thought you were gone." Sarah pushed herself up, her mind racing. "What happened? Where is everyone?" "Everyone else is okay," David said, helping her to her feet. "But the ship, we can't communicate with it. It's like the artifact's energy has scrambled everything. The comms are useless." She glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation. The other members of the crew were scattered throughout the chamber, all of them recovering from the energy surge. Some were still dazed, others were already scanning the area, trying to understand what had just happened. "We need to get back to the ship," Sarah said, her voice firm. "That's our only way out of here." David nodded but didn't move. His eyes were locked on the glowing symbols etched into the walls of the structure. "Captain, we're not alone here. Something's out there." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had felt it too, an unmistakable presence. It was as though they were being watched, though there was no sign of life. The planet had been empty before, but now it felt different. Alive. "We need to keep moving," Sarah insisted, but her mind was racing with unanswered questions. What had caused the sudden energy pulse? And why had the artifact chosen to reveal itself now? They made their way out of the chamber, carefully stepping over the ruins of alien technology, some of which was now malfunctioning, sparking erratically. The outside world was no less strange. The once desolate landscape had transformed. Where there had been nothing but cracked earth, now there were towering obelisks of stone, shimmering with the same energy that emanated from the artifact. The air smelled different, too, a strange mix of sulfur and ozone. "Something's changing," Dr. Moore said, his voice shaky as he approached Sarah. "These structures, they weren't here before. They're shifting. Like they're alive." Sarah looked around, her instincts telling her to remain cautious. The ground beneath their feet was still trembling faintly, and the odd, pulsating energy seemed to be radiating from the towering obelisks in every direction. It was as though they were in the center of some grand, forgotten mechanism, a dormant force that had just been awakened. "We need to figure out what this is before it's too late," Sarah said, her voice grim. "Head to the ship. We'll regroup and plan our next move." The crew followed her, moving cautiously across the alien terrain. As they walked, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving with them, just out of sight. A subtle rustling in the air, the faintest vibration beneath their feet, small things that added to the growing sense of unease. But they made it to the ship, or what was left of it. The Astrias had been damaged by the energy pulse. The hull was cracked in several places, and the landing gear was stuck in the cracked earth. The ship's communication systems were completely offline. It was clear that they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. "Captain," David said, his voice tense. "The ship's not going to fly. We're stuck here, and the systems are too damaged to fix without help." Sarah sighed. "Great. Just what we needed." But as she spoke, her attention was drawn to a faint light flickering in the distance. At first, she thought it was another malfunctioning piece of technology, but as the light grew brighter, she realized it was something else. A figure. The figure was tall, almost imposing, silhouetted against the glow of the obelisks. It moved with a strange fluidity, gliding across the terrain as if gravity didn't quite apply to it the same way it did to them. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she was seeing things, but when the figure stopped and turned toward them, she knew she wasn't. The crew froze. "What is that?" Dr. Moore whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. Instead, it simply raised one arm, pointing directly at Sarah. In that instant, everything became clear. The transmission they had received, the artifact, the strange energy, it was all connected. This figure wasn't just another alien species. It was something far older, far more powerful. And it wasn't happy to see them. "Captain," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't just a random discovery anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger than they had ever anticipated. The ancient civilization, the artifact, it was all leading to this moment. "We have to find out who, or what, that is," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the terror that gripped her. "And we need to do it now. Before it finds us first." The ship was in chaos. Crew members scrambled around, trying to make sense of the situation, but nothing was working. Sarah stood at the ship's command console, her eyes fixed on the flickering screens, desperately trying to get any kind of communication through to Earth, to anyone. But the signal was still dead, buried beneath layers of strange interference. David stood nearby, his hands clenched into fists. "Captain, we can't keep waiting like this. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets." She didn't look at him. Her mind was elsewhere, focusing on the dim lights of the ship's systems that refused to power up. The pulse that had hit the Astrius when they first encountered the artifact had left it crippled. But more than that, there was a deep unease crawling beneath her skin. The planet wasn't just reacting to them, it was changing. Evolving. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the crew as they worked to try and salvage what little they could from the wreckage of their ship. But even with their best efforts, it was clear that they were trapped. There was no escape. "How long until we can get the main power systems back online?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her insides. "We're trying, Captain," David replied. "But it's not looking good. The power cells are fried, and the repair drones are offline. We'd need external help, and there's no telling if we can even reach any of the nearby stations." Sarah's frustration was palpable. She rubbed her forehead, trying to think of their next move. But then her eyes flicked back to the distance. The figure they had seen earlier was still out there, standing motionless beneath the distant obelisks. It hadn't moved. It hadn't advanced toward them or retreated, but it was as though it was waiting. For them. "The figure," Sarah muttered to herself. "I don't think it's a threat, yet." David turned to her. "What do you mean?" "It's not acting aggressively," Sarah explained, her voice low. "It's standing still, observing us. If it wanted to attack, it would have already. This is something else." "What else?" David asked, confused. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's part of a bigger picture. The energy, the artifact, the obelisks, it's all connected." She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. They were running out of time. If they didn't figure out what was going on, they might be stuck here forever, or worse. But in the back of her mind, she had a terrible thought. What if the figure wasn't waiting for them? What if it was waiting for something else? Something that could bring them all to their end? Hours later. The crew had gathered in the mess hall, a large, dimly lit room at the heart of the Astrius. Sarah sat at the table, staring at the map of the planet displayed on the wall, her mind racing with possibilities. They had tried everything to get the ship operational again, but nothing worked. The strange interference from the artifact continued to disrupt their systems. They were stranded. The crew had fallen silent, the weight of the situation pressing on them. The air was thick with tension. They were all thinking the same thing, they needed answers. "We have to go to the artifact," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We have no choice." David shot her a wary look. "Captain, we don't know what that thing is. It could be dangerous. It could be the only way we get off this planet," she replied, her voice resolute. "The artifact is the key. If we can find out what it is, we can figure out how to get the power back. It's our only shot." "You really think that thing can help us?" Dr. Moore asked, his voice skeptical. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I don't see any other options. We're running out of time." There was a long pause as the crew exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, David spoke up. "All right. We'll do it. But we need to stay together. No one goes off alone. Understood?" The crew nodded, a sense of determination settling over them. The fear was still there, but it was beginning to give way to the urgency of their situation. They were in this together. The journey to the artifact. The terrain outside was nothing like they had ever seen before. The air was thick and heavy, charged with energy that hummed in their ears. The obelisks stretched toward the sky like ancient sentinels, their surfaces glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The ground beneath their boots was uneven, jagged rocks cutting through the otherwise smooth surface. As they moved toward the artifact, Sarah's eyes scanned the surroundings. Everything about this place felt alien, unnatural, even. The way the obelisks pulsed with energy, the constant hum in the air, the odd way the landscape seemed to shift as they moved through it, it was as though the entire planet was alive, reacting to their presence. And then they saw it. The artifact was enormous. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever encountered. It wasn't a machine or a weapon, but rather a massive structure that seemed to float above the ground. Its surface was smooth, glistening like glass, but there were strange patterns etched into it, patterns that seemed to move and shift as if they were alive. The very air around it crackled with energy, the ground beneath their feet vibrating with an unseen force. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe. The crew gathered around the base of the artifact, eyes wide with wonder and fear. No one spoke. They could all feel it, the immense power radiating from the artifact. It was like standing in the presence of something ancient, something beyond their comprehension. As Sarah approached, the ground beneath her seemed to respond, the energy pulsing more intensely. The artifact shimmered, and for a moment, she thought she saw something, someone, inside it. A figure, distant and hazy, almost like a reflection, staring back at her. The air seemed to thicken. The energy surged. And then, with a violent crackle, the artifact began to open. The figure emerged from the heart of the artifact, stepping into the dim light that bathed the alien landscape. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by shadows. But its presence was undeniable. Every movement was fluid, deliberate, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She had never felt a presence so overwhelming, so alien, yet so familiar. It was as if she could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her. The air around her hummed with a strange energy, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Stay back," she whispered to the crew, her voice low, warning them to hold their ground. They had no idea what this figure was, but they couldn't let fear take over. Not yet. David stepped forward, his hand hovering near the sidearm at his waist. "Captain, what are we dealing with here?" Sarah shook her head, her mind racing. She had no answers. But something told her that they were about to learn everything they needed to know. Everything that would change their understanding of this mission, and perhaps their place in the universe. The figure stopped in its tracks, its head tilting ever so slightly as though it was studying them. Its eyes were glowing now, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through the darkness. But despite its alien appearance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were looking directly at her, piercing deep into her soul. Without warning, the figure spoke. Its voice was a soft, almost melodic hum, as though it resonated not just in the air but in her very bones. "You should not have come." Sarah froze. The voice was strange, unlike anything she had ever heard. It was a sound that transcended language, ancient, deep, and unfathomable. Yet, in the back of her mind, she understood its meaning. "We had no choice," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to rise. "Our ship is damaged. We need your help." The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it raised one long, slender hand, pointing directly at Sarah. The gesture was both a command and a question. As its finger moved toward her, the ground beneath their feet trembled once again, the hum of the air intensifying. "Your kind is not meant to interfere," the figure said, its tone both sorrowful and stern. "The balance of the ancient ones must remain undisturbed. You have awakened what should have remained dormant." Sarah's pulse quickened. Her mind was racing, trying to process the figure's words. What did it mean by "your kind"? And what were these ancient ones that the figure spoke of? Before she could ask, the figure's eyes seemed to glow brighter, casting a pale light across the desolate landscape. The air seemed to crackle with energy as the figure extended both arms toward the artifact, its movements fluid but deliberate. Then, as if answering some silent command, the ground beneath their feet trembled once again, but this time, the tremors were stronger. A low rumble echoed from deep within the planet. It was as though the entire world was awakening, responding to the figure's actions. The obelisks surrounding them began to glow with an intensity Sarah hadn't seen before. The air shimmered, distorting their surroundings as though they were caught in some kind of unnatural energy field. The artifact, once a mysterious and silent object, now thrummed with power. Its surface rippled, shifting like liquid metal, revealing symbols, complex, intricate patterns that moved and danced, defying logic. The crew stood frozen, unable to look away from the spectacle unfolding before them. It was as if the planet itself was alive and angry. Suddenly, a voice broke through the tension, sharp and urgent. "Captain." It was David, his eyes wide with panic. "The ship. It's starting to break apart." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned to see the Astrius in the distance, its hull shaking violently, the structure groaning under the pressure. It looked as though the ship itself was being pulled apart from the inside out. "We need to get back," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." But as she turned to face the crew, she saw something she hadn't expected. The figure, the alien presence that had so thoroughly dominated their attention, was no longer standing motionless. It was moving, its long, graceful limbs gliding through the air as though it were walking on invisible currents. It stepped toward them, its form becoming clearer with each movement. The shadows that had once obscured its face began to fade, revealing something else. Not a face in the traditional sense, but something much more unsettling. Its features were smooth and fluid, like a mask that could shift at will. Yet its eyes remained constant, those piercing, glowing blue eyes. The figure stopped in front of Sarah. The ground beneath her feet seemed to soften, as though the very planet was reacting to the alien's presence. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she stood her ground, refusing to show fear. "I am the Guardian," the figure said, its voice carrying the weight of ages. "The balance you have disturbed was not meant for your kind. But now that you have awakened it, you must face the consequences." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "Consequences? What does that mean?" The Guardian's eyes dimmed for a moment, almost as though it were contemplating how much it should reveal. "The awakening of the Ancient Ones cannot be undone. The power you seek will not come freely. You will be tested." "Tested?" David echoed, his voice incredulous. "By who?" The Guardian's form seemed to blur, its presence growing more intense. "By them," it said, its voice now a whisper in the wind. Before Sarah could respond, the air around them began to crackle with an overwhelming energy. A deep hum vibrated through the ground, shaking their bodies to the core. From the horizon, an unnatural light began to rise, blindingly bright, casting long shadows over the landscape. Sarah shielded her eyes, her heart racing as the light intensified. The world around them seemed to twist and bend as the strange energy from the artifact reached its peak. The obelisks began to pulse in time with the hum, and the ground beneath their feet trembled as if the very fabric of reality was about to tear apart. Then, without warning, the ground cracked open. A deep fissure split the planet's surface, sending a shockwave through the air. The crew stumbled, struggling to maintain their balance as the earth beneath them rumbled. The Guardian stood unwavering, its form completely unaffected by the chaos surrounding them. But Sarah could feel the weight of its gaze, heavy, judgmental. "You must face the trial," the Guardian intoned. "You have awakened the Ancient Ones. Now you must prove your worth." The light from the horizon grew ever more intense, blinding them all. Sarah squinted, trying to make out what was happening. From within the fissure, something massive was emerging, something that defied comprehension. A shape, long and angular, its surface gleaming like polished metal, rose from the depths. It was a ship. But not just any ship. It was ancient. It was alien. And it was coming for them. The enormous alien ship loomed above them, casting an unnatural shadow over the landscape. The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath their feet still trembled with the shockwaves from the earlier eruption. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she took in the scale of the ship, its jagged, angular form like nothing they had ever seen. It was clear now that the trial had begun, and they were no longer mere explorers. They were players in something much larger, something ancient beyond their comprehension. The Guardian stood motionless before them, its glowing blue eyes unwavering. It had spoken of a trial, but what kind of test lay ahead? And what would happen if they failed? Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. "What do we need to do?" she demanded, trying to steady her voice. She couldn't afford to appear weak now, not in front of her crew, and certainly not in front of whatever ancient force had just awoken. The Guardian's voice echoed in the air like a whisper carried on the wind. "You have disturbed forces beyond your understanding. The trial will test your worth. Should you fail, you will be erased from existence. Should you succeed, you will learn the truth." David stepped forward, his face tense. "Erased? What does that mean?" His voice trembled, though he tried to mask it with defiance. The Guardian did not answer immediately. Instead, it extended one long, graceful hand, gesturing toward the alien ship that hovered above them. "The trial awaits you within. Enter, and face what has been set before you." Before Sarah could respond, the ship's enormous doors opened with a low, rumbling sound. It was an invitation, but it felt more like a command. The crew had no choice but to move forward. There was no retreat now. "Let's go," Sarah said, her voice firm as she motioned for the crew to follow. "Stick together. We don't know what's waiting inside." They began to walk toward the ship, the ground beneath their feet shifting with each step. The massive doors slowly closed behind them, sealing them inside the ship, and the interior was nothing like they had expected. The walls were smooth and reflective, stretching high into the distance, like some kind of living material that pulsed with an eerie, soft glow. It was cold, unnaturally so. A faint hum vibrated through the walls, making Sarah's skin prickle with an unsettling sensation. But more than that, there was something else, something deep and ancient in the air that made it feel as though they were not alone. The ship was alive, and it was watching them. As they ventured deeper into the ship, a soft, ethereal light began to grow stronger, casting long shadows as it shifted with their movements. The crew moved cautiously, scanning every corner, every strange symbol etched into the walls. The place was both beautiful and terrifying in its quiet majesty. "It's like a temple," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "But it doesn't feel like it was ever meant to be a place of worship. It feels more like a prison." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The ship was ancient, that much was clear. But how long had it been dormant? And what was the trial it had in store for them? Suddenly, the soft hum grew louder. The air around them began to vibrate more intensely, almost as if the ship itself was reacting to their presence. Then, from the darkness ahead, something began to take shape. A doorway, unlike any they had seen before, materialized from the shadows. It was massive, and the symbols that decorated it glowed with an otherworldly energy. As they approached, the door slid open without a sound, revealing a vast chamber. The room was enormous, stretching far beyond what the eye could see. In the center, there was a pedestal, and atop it, a crystal, pure and unblemished. It emitted a soft, pulsating light that seemed to draw them in, beckoning them closer. "This is it," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with awe and caution. "The trial. The answer we've been searching for." But as they stepped closer to the pedestal, the ground beneath their feet shifted again. The air became thick with a strange pressure, as though the ship itself were testing their resolve. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a being unlike any they had seen before. It was tall, humanoid, but its features were shifting, constantly changing. One moment, it appeared as a being of light, and the next, it took on the form of a dark, twisted creature. It was as if the very concept of its identity was fluid, constantly morphing into something else. Sarah's hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, but the figure spoke before she could draw it. "You have entered the chamber," it said, its voice resonating through the air. "But it is not enough. You must pass the trial to prove your worth." The figure's form began to solidify, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien. There was an unsettling calm in its eyes, a deep wisdom that seemed to pierce right through them. "The trial is not one of strength or weapons," the figure continued. "It is a trial of the mind, a test of your deepest fears, your darkest truths. Only those who are pure of heart may succeed. Only those who face their demons and come out stronger will survive." Sarah's stomach churned. "What are you talking about? What kind of test is this?" The figure stepped aside, revealing the pedestal once more. The crystal pulsed brighter, as though urging them to come closer. "This is the trial of truth," the figure said, its voice echoing in the vast room. "You must face what lies within your soul. Only then will you be worthy of what you seek." David shook his head. "This isn't a game. What happens if we fail?" The figure's gaze turned cold, almost pitying. "Failure means erasure. You will cease to exist in any form. Your minds, your memories, everything you are, will be forgotten." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "Erased, completely?" The figure nodded. "There is no second chance. The trial will reveal the truth about who you are. Whether you are ready or not." The crew stood in silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. Sarah's mind raced. She had no idea what this trial would involve, but she knew one thing for sure: failure was not an option. One by one, the crew stepped forward, each person facing the crystal. Sarah watched as their expressions shifted: fear, uncertainty, resolve, as the trial began to work its magic. The crystal glowed brighter with each person who touched it, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if they were all about to disappear forever. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. As her hand reached out to touch the crystal, the world around her seemed to shift. The chamber, the ship, even her own body felt like they were fading into something else, into another realm. Then, everything went black. Sarah stood frozen. The cold air wrapped around her, biting at her skin, but the chill wasn't what made her shiver. The scene in front of her was not just unfamiliar, it was impossible. She was no longer inside the alien ship. She was standing in a barren, war-torn landscape that stretched out for miles, the ruins of buildings scattered around her like the remnants of a forgotten world. The sky above was bruised and dark, swirling with storm clouds that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. But what struck her the most was the sense of déjà vu. She had seen this place before. It wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. Her mind reeled, struggling to comprehend what was happening. How is this possible? She glanced around, trying to make sense of the twisted reality that surrounded her. She was standing in the middle of a battlefield, the remnants of war littering the ground. Wrecked vehicles, broken weapons, and fallen soldiers, all signs of a conflict long over, but one that left its scars deep in the land. The very earth seemed to mourn the violence that had taken place. She took a cautious step forward, her boots crunching on the gravel beneath her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her heart pounding as the realization began to settle in. This place wasn't just familiar, it was her past. The battlefield she was standing on was Earth. It was the site of the last war, the war she had been part of. The war that had nearly wiped out humanity. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. "This can't be real." A familiar voice echoed in the distance, and Sarah's body froze. She knew that voice. She turned slowly, and there, standing amidst the rubble, was someone she never thought she would see again. David. But this wasn't the David she had known. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, his eyes wild and desperate. He was older, harder, as though the weight of years had taken their toll on him. And yet, it was undeniably him. Sarah! David shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. Sarah, you have to come with me. Sarah's breath hitched. David, what is this? What's happening? David ran toward her, his feet kicking up dust with every frantic step. When he reached her, he gripped her shoulders, his eyes burning with urgency. You can't stay here, Sarah. This place, it's not real. You have to come with me. The trial, it's... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes darting nervously around them. The battlefield was starting to distort, the ruins and debris flickering in and out of focus. The storm clouds above swirled faster, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. What's going on? Sarah demanded, panic rising in her chest. David, what is this place? Why are we here? David hesitated, his grip tightening on her shoulders. This is where it all began, he said quietly. This is the moment we failed. This is the war that destroyed Earth. Sarah's mind raced. We failed? We lost the war. David nodded grimly. We were part of the last defense. A last-ditch effort to stop the alien invasion that nearly wiped out humanity. But, we weren't enough. No one was. And now, we're here, trapped in the past. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The war had been a devastating conflict. The aliens, with their advanced technology and ruthless tactics, had come in waves, destroying everything in their path. The last bastion of human resistance had fought to the bitter end, but it had all been in vain. But how is this possible? Sarah gasped. Why are we here now? David looked down, his face etched with guilt and sorrow. This is the trial, Sarah. The trial the Guardian spoke of. It's not just a test of strength or skill. It's a test of the past, our past. The choices we made, the mistakes we couldn't undo. We're reliving the moment we failed. Sarah shook her head, her mind spinning. No, I can't. I can't face this. I didn't fail. I was part of the resistance. I fought. I know, David interrupted, his voice soft but firm. We all fought. But the war was bigger than us. Bigger than any of us. The trial isn't about what happened, it's about what we became after the war. It's about understanding the choices we made, and what we were willing to sacrifice. The ground beneath them quaked again, and the reality around them twisted violently. Sarah staggered, her vision blurring as the sky above erupted in a cascade of lightning. She stumbled, falling to her knees as the battlefield around her seemed to collapse into chaos. David grabbed her arm, pulling her back to her feet. We have to move. Now. If we don't. But before he could finish, the ground split open beneath them, a gaping chasm of dark energy yawning wide. The storm intensified, the wind howling through the ruins as the earth itself seemed to tear apart. A loud, deafening noise filled the air, drowning out everything else. And then, something emerged from the chasm. A figure, taller than any human, its body shrouded in shadow. It stepped forward, its eyes glowing with a cold, unnatural light. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was the Guardian. But it wasn't the same as before. This version was no longer a passive observer, it was an entity of pure power, its form shifting like smoke, its presence suffocating the air around them. Sarah, the Guardian's voice echoed. Its tone dark and ominous. You have entered the trial. You have faced your past. But the true test is not of your memories. It is of your will. Will you accept the truth, or will you choose to live in denial? Sarah stood up straighter, her resolve hardening. What is this truth? What do you want from me? The guardian's form flickered, its voice distorted. The truth is that the war was not your fault. You were a part of something bigger, something beyond your control. But your failure to act after, your refusal to face what came next, is why you are here. The words were like daggers, but Sarah didn't flinch. I did what I had to do. We all did. We fought to the end. But at what cost? The guardian's voice was harsh, almost accusing. You fought, yes. But you never faced the consequences. You chose to forget, to bury the truth deep within you. David stepped forward, his face pale. Sarah, don't listen to it. It's trying to make us doubt ourselves. This is the trial, it's meant to break us. But the guardian was not done. Its form loomed closer, and the ground beneath Sarah's feet began to shift once more. The trial is not just about what you faced in the past, Sarah. It is about the choices you make now. You can continue living in the shadow of your failure, or you can accept the truth and move forward. What will you choose? Sarah's heart raced, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't remain in this past, haunted by guilt and regret. She had to move forward, even if it meant confronting the painful truth. I choose to move forward, Sarah said, her voice steady, though every part of her screamed with doubt. I choose to face the truth, no matter how difficult it is. The guardian's form seemed to shimmer in approval, its eyes glowing brighter. You have passed the trial, Sarah. You have faced your past and chosen to move beyond it. You are worthy. Suddenly, the storm began to dissipate, the ruins of the battlefield fading into nothingness. The dark clouds parted, and Sarah felt the oppressive weight lift from her chest. She was no longer in the battlefield. She was back in the alien ship, standing before the crystal once more. David stood beside her, his face reflecting the same sense of relief and understanding. The air around them was still, peaceful, as though the trial had finally ended. Did we make it? David asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes locking with his. We did. We faced it, and we came out stronger. The guardian appeared once again, but this time, it was calm, almost serene. You have succeeded, it said, its voice no longer filled with judgment. You are worthy. The truth has been revealed, and with it, you have earned the knowledge of what lies ahead. Sarah took a deep breath, finally feeling the weight of the trial lift from her shoulders. The answers were within her reach now, and the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready to face whatever came next.